Hello and welcome to Corny Barrett Burgundy Unpicked podcast series, where today's episode is focusing on Domaine Dugat-Py 2023s. We're in a slightly different location, so if the sound is slightly different, that will be the bearing. We sort of seem to be gathered around a corner table with a glass top, dark green, almost calligraphy-esque silver writing, so it's just missing the Ouija board. But I'm joined with Guy Seddon. Hello. Hi, Joe. Neville Kirkpatrick. Hello. And Aaron Eccles.
Good afternoon.
Hello. So we obviously had a brilliant week last week with Loïc Dugat over from the Domaine and had a series of a few events, which were a lot of fun, very successful, a lot of enthusiasm about this Domaine. So I think I know all four of us are big fans because of what Loïc's done, which we'll go to in a moment. But we had a tasting of the 23s. Guy and I went to taste in November along with Adam and Bryce at the Domaine, which was a wonderful tasting, brutally long, 3 hours. There's a lot of wines. The offer is now live, and you'll see there are 37 wines within the offer. But Guy, do you want to sort of introduce and set the tone and a nice visual setting for how we tasted in November?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. With pleasure. Dugat-Py, I think, is a name that people have heard of, and I think the actual detail of the wines and the experience of drinking them is possibly less well known than the reputation of the Domaine. And so we've been going there now for 3 years. This was our third kind of team visit to the Domaine, and we've now increasingly got to know how things work. And it's a slightly quirky tasting in the sense that you have so many wines, as you say. I think the first time we visited, we slightly astonished Loïc by saying that we wanted to taste everything. And as you say, I mean, tasting everything is now getting on for 40 wines, and we do it over the space of 3 hours, 2 wines at a time. So we sort of sit in the corner of a very dark cellar, lit by a mobile phone light, and sort of huddled around the table, and some of us balancing on sort of barrels and things, and Loïc goes off with a pipette and then runs back with the next glass or the next couple of glasses, and we taste like that 2 by 2 by 2, literally without a break for 3 hours. So I mean, it was a fairly intense experience, but I love it. I mean, I think it's
the Domaine is it's quite something because it's almost got this crypt-like feel, hasn't it? The cellar underneath the house, and the tasting itself, it was probably quite spiritual, to be fair. The 23s were quite immaculate, and Loïc's, we'll talk about his style of wine in a few short minutes, but they came through brilliantly in 23, and I've grown to quite like the setting. That double glass feel. It's a bit of a marathon. However, a marathon you enjoy because it progresses through and across a lot of appellations as well, which is one of the wonderful things about Domaine Dugat-Py. And I remember, this year, I think Loïc said he's added, was it 6 or 7 wines to the Domaine, which, meant for a little bit more exploration on our half. I think, shall we start with, you mentioned Dugat-Py, already has a reputation. So his father, Bernard, was, clearly running the Domaine for a long time, took the wines to a certain level of notoriety. Then, Loïc has been involved in the Domaine for a very long time. He sort of took over the management in 2014, and then full ownership of the Domaine in 2016. So, that's when his papa, if you like, sort of stepped down. But he's brought in a lot of changes, viticulturally and in the winemaking. So would one of you like to touch on?
Yeah, I mean, let's do that. That's definitely what we should do. I just wanted to go back to the sort of origins of the Domaine just while we've got a chance. Just say that this is an estate that stretches back to the 17th century in its gestation. And the cellar where we taste, this sort of amazing ecclesiastical, as you say, sort of vaulted cellar, goes back to the 11th century. So it was part of an abbey.
Definitely spirits in there.
So, it's been there for literally centuries, if not millennia, or 1 millennium at least. It's a really, really historic setting to taste wines in. And I think, there are lots of exciting changes happening at the Domaine. But I think to put it in context of an estate, a cellar that's been there for such a long time, it's really astonishing.
You must ask Loïc on your next visit if there's been any supernatural activity to speak of.
I will add that to my list.
Maybe it's this episode for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where's my half demijohn of Chambertin disappeared to? Exactly. Yeah, so I think it's a good point, to lead from there. It is definitely rooted and steeped in a huge amount of history. And Loïc's, is he sort of 11th generation, did you say, or sort of 11th or 13th?
He is 13th,
yeah.
13th generation.
So yeah, it's the Burgundian roots are very obvious and deeply rooted as well. But I mean, so his father, Bernard, his wines were probably more known for heavy extraction, the use of newer oak, a lot of them with 100% new oak, and made in a traditional Burgundian manner. Like these are not big negative things. There's only in certain phases of Burgundy's evolution with trends and modern styles where people sort of frown upon them. And okay, I think what we'll get to is the point that Loïc's fixation for detail and a quest for overall exemplary quality is clear, is paramount throughout all that he does with the work. But, his father's wines are quite impressive. I mean, we had an 05, last week of the Mazis-Chambertin, Mazoyères-Chambertin. And but yeah, should we start with what Loïc's done in the cellar?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I was just going to say very, very quickly is that, these sort of older, sort of traditional style of Bernard, these are wines built for the ages, and, they may not be sort of what everybody is sort of fixating on in sort of contemporary Burgundy. But, these were, particularly as you get to sort of Premier Cru and Grand Cru level, these were wines that were designed to last decades upon decades. And that's what the sort of slightly more extractive processes and heavier sort of oak treatment was to ensure, is that, these were wines that were going to be in the cellar forever. Now, Loïc, I think we can all agree, has sort of found this amazing balance between sort of the old and new, in the sense that there is a focus on the ageability and that these wines are designed to receive extensive cellaring to sort of reach their apogee. But simultaneously, there's a sort of charm and lift in their youth that I think has not been sort of historically seen at the Domaine. And I think that sort of extra level of refinement, elegance, and sort of purity that you see there, I think that's what is really getting us pretty excited.
Yeah, very much. I mean, I think it's also worth noting a big thing with Domaine Dugat-Py, and one of the things that Loïc will often refer to is the age of the vines. And the holdings at the Domaine, 70 to 100 years year old vines is very commonplace throughout all different appellations. This isn't just at the Grand Cru or Premier Cru. This is all across. And obviously, you rewind 30 years when Bernard was doing it, though it takes those vine age to sort of 50 to 70 years, which is still incredibly long-lived vines, which increases the density of that fruit provided. So you're dealing with a style which is all about longevity with a denser style of fruit as well. So it is going to be that sort of component, like you said.
Yeah, I asked him about the sort of the component of the old vines, because it's not actually seen that much in Burgundy. You have sort of the Trappes who have the plots going back to 1859, and a couple of other producers who sort of have quite old vines, but
like a smattering, isn't it, here and there? Yeah.
Most of the time, vines of that age would just become sort of unproductive and then uprooted. It's not really like your Aussie Shiraz vines that sort of keep on producing these really concentrated grapes. And he said it goes hand in hand with organics, particularly the plots where the tractors just don't enter. He thinks that tractors entering vineyards really do damage the vines, and therefore they, if you have a tractor enter in a vineyard, the vines can only go to about 70, maybe 80 years. But there's, he has a couple of plots that the tractor's never entered. It's always been horse and plough, and therefore the vines can go to 115 years.
Yeah, interesting.
Like, I think that's important to say, that it's not just old vines for old vines' sake. And I think now you have sort of the quality of the grapes being produced under, well, they're certified organic, but under biodynamic, and therefore you have sort of these building blocks for fantastic wines.
Yeah, no, indeed.
And he has this idea of having a holistic vine, a vine in balance, is very central to what he's doing in the vineyards. And I think by doing this arching of the vine canes, which a lot of people have done in Burgundy in recent years, Loïc's been doing it for several years and has never really communicated that. I mean, he sort of tends to do things and then talk about them afterwards, which I find quite refreshing. But by arching the vines and raising the trellis height to 2 meters for all of his Premier and Grand Crus, he's enabled the vines to grow to their full extent without needing trimming, which in turn enables the roots to dig deeper. So you do end up with this real sort of holistically balanced vine. And you can see that the quality of fruit and the resulting quality in the wine is a real beneficiary as a result of that.
Yeah, I mean, I also feel on your comment, there are several people who have been adopting this method, and it might all similar. So like Echelon, kind of a similar principle as well, slightly implemented differently within the vineyard. But because we've got a few producers we work with who are so quality focused, maybe it feels a little bit more common to us. But on the grand scheme of things in Burgundy, it's really a minuscule amount. And I don't think certainly we should highlight the amount of work involved in converting those vineyards is massive. And the overall size of the domain is 15 hectares. There are 62.5% of the domain's holdings are only between 0.09 hectare and 0.33 hectare, so a third of a hectare or less. So that's a lot of traveling around with all the different plots. So he's a man, I mean, fastidious and dedicated, clearly, and the fact that he's continuing to add to the domain's holdings, I find incredibly admirable as well. But yeah, I think that tressage is a key component to the identity, allowing the terroir to be reflected as predominantly as possible. And again, we very much, in the Cornu Barrow ways, we like to work with domains that are all about the terroir and support the overall site and the cru. But I think it's probably good to talk about, within his vineyard practices as well, that Loïc is very fond compared to what his father was doing, picking earlier as well. So you've got this sort of tressage effect within the components and the structure of the grapes phonetically and physiologically, so which will translate in lower alcohols, slightly different textures, silken, tender fruits. But with this earlier picking, he really wants to get this, doesn't he? This sort of fresh appeal within the wines, which for me, almost, especially in a vintage like 23 when we tasted it, invigorates that presence of terroir, because you've got this sort of almost vibrancy that's there that kind of isn't in some of his competitors' wines because of that slightly earlier picking style.
Yeah. And then if we talk about the cellar maybe as well, I mean, those in a nutshell are the sort of main changes that he's done in the vineyard. In the cellar, really, it's reducing the amount of new oak and then also beginning to use Italian amphora. So there's a sort of terracotta vessels, which he's been using for both vinification and aging, which is quite unusual to use them for both. Not for 100% of his wines, but I think now pretty much all of the Premier and Grand Crus are making use of this amphora technique, which really highlights the purity of fruit. I think it brings a kind of a focus and a crystalline quality to the fruit, which you wouldn't necessarily get to the same extent with the traditional oak barrels.
It's not to say that he's sort of moving away from oak barrels. It's not complete about face on oak. It is still sort of very much at the identity of the Domaine high quality oaks being used, but now it's usually between sort of 10% and 25%, whereas it used to be, for even for some of the village level wines, it used to be 100% new oak, and wine just takes that a little bit longer to swallow that oak and to really shine through with the fruit afterwards, which is just amazing to see how we can sort of bring new textures to the wines and bring new dimensions to them.
Yeah, and it's only really when you start, well, obviously when you taste, but also when you sort of start digging into the domain a little bit more, you realise how unique the style is. You've got this, tremendously old vine fruit combined with this sort of relatively, modern sort of winemaking style with the use of amphora. And you have this sort of juxtaposition in the wines where you have this sort of crystalline fruit character, but you also have, Loïc, as I sort of mentioned earlier, these wines are also designed to age, and as a consequence, there is immense power and length to these wines, but the fruit is so detailed and there's so much finesse that I think that it's that combination of sort of intense concentration and longevity and that sort of sense of precision that there are lots of winemakers in Burgundy who have achieved this sort of crystalline prettiness of fruit, but it's not always sort of allied with that sort of sense of muscularity, concentration, and power. And to have that from Village all the way up to Grand Cru it's unusual.
Actually, when you get to taste there as well, Loïc does make sure that he sort of takes components from each individual barrel and amphora as well and blends them at the time for you. So when you are tasting that, you do get to sort of see how they actually show. I mean, in a previous life, I tasted there in 2019. Wines were absolutely fantastic. So I was a bit gutted when we lost being able to sell them to Corny and Barrow at that.
Well, look at you now.
Exactly, it all worked out well. But to sort of give credence to your ghosties in the cellar, I did try taking many a photo of Loïc during the entire time, but he was so busy running around that it's just blurry pictures that I have now. So maybe he can't be photographed.
Maybe that's why he doesn't like light in the cellar. Maybe it's a sort of no publicity thing.
Could be the photographer. So just to add on your point now, I agree, because I think that's a very valid one, where especially when you throw in the use of whole bunch fermentation as well. So Loïc's obviously brought this into play properly at the Domaine, and it's sort of generally between 40 and 60%. It varies vintage to vintage, and that whole bunch character, as we know, is on trend. So people know the sort of the traits, that parts to the wine, and we all. I mean, I certainly do. I know you guys around the table here also like the various perfume aspects, freshness, sort of benefits and textural gains, etc. But some people with that trend are producing these wines, which, like you said, are sort of more so focused on infusion and lightness of touch and transparency to agree where, how are they going to age? We don't know. Certainly one thing Loïc has taken from his father, and he says this because particularly with, again, going back to the plots they have, Loïc says that great terroirs only wake up 5 to 10 years into the bottle. So he's sort of, and again, I think using that terracotta as a sort of slight support to, not only does he want to give further credence, to use your word, Aaron, to terroir expression, because that's really what you're going to be doing with no oak, parted in there. But it's also about retaining the structure of Gevrey fruit, or whether it's going to be pommard fruit, or whichever premier crus are sort of placed within from the Domaine. So yes, there are changes away, but there's clear links back and influence from his father as well. So I think that's a good summary on the changes. There's not much more to add really, and then I think he's just striving for that quality. And I love also the terracotta side. He's been doing that for a long time. I think the first venture was 18, and there's only certain people that have only been doing it far more recently and making a lot of noise about it. He doesn't. Should we go to them? So we've all tasted the 23s now. So Loïc was here last week. We did some events with sommeliers and then a private customer dinner and in-house tasting with the guys here at Corny's. There's the team. So if we were to pick, let's say, I don't know, your standout wine from the offer, it's a Domaine focused, on Gevrey. That's where it's based and where there's a lot of love for it. So what's your sort of favorite Gevrey from them? But as I've detailed already, there's a lot going on outside of Gevrey. And also, I'd like to point, probably insert here now, there's a growing following for his white wines as well. It's a Domaine that's mainly known for its red. But there are some incredible parcels that Loïc has added. And actually, the following is pretty cool, particularly when you think about his earlier pick style, which he likes to do, but with this sort of the fruit reflection that he's keen to capture and to captivate people when they open them. I wouldn't dismiss them in any way. In fact, one of the most oversubscribed I've had from my orders so far is Folatier and Courton Charlemagne. The reds are obviously, there's a little bit more volume, but so if you had to pick one wine overall, one from Gevrey and one from outside of Gevrey, what would you go for? So, Guy, do you want to?
Okay, so one from Gevrey. Well, my scores and notes are in the brochure, so I mean, I'm actually not going to pick my highest score, which I think went to Mazis-Chambertin, which is a wonderful wine.
It's glorious, yeah.
I'm going to pick to just have a little chat about the Lavaux Saint-Jacques Premier Cru, so Gevrey-Chambertin Premier Cru Lavaux. This is a parcel it's a tiny parcel. It's only 0.14 hectares. It's right beside the Combe Lavaux, which is a side valley that comes down from the hills. And what I love about these wines, which are sort of defined by the combes, which are adjacent to them, is that you get these really cooling breezes, and it brings this freshness. And in summers like 23 or like in 22, which were big warm summers, you get this cooling moderation to the climate, which I find gives a really intriguing combination of kind of finesse and elegance alongside a sort of natural phenolic concentration. And so I think Lavaux Saint-Jacques in 23 was a wonderful example of that. It's aromatically very pretty, but it's a wine for the long term. It's a wine which you need to leave and give some time in the cellar. But that is a very interesting wine by my
Yeah, it was a beauty. Yeah.
And then something else, I'm going to go to the Côte de Beaune and pick his Montelly. He calls it Très Vieille Vigne in recognition of the fact that the average vine age is over 70 years here. So it's not any old Montelly. It's quite a grown-up one in terms of where it comes from. I love Montelly as a place. I love the wines it produces. It's one of the prettiest villages, I think, in that part of the Côte de Beaune. You sort of drive up into the hills, and you almost go down a little side valley, and it's very bucolic. You could almost be in pure virgin countryside. And so it's a wine that always brings back those memories for me.
Well, we were chatting about this earlier on. I mean, we all in agreement. I mean, I haven't had a better Montelly. I think it is the best Montelly red out there as a producer goes. I know Kosh has obviously got a bit of a following, but it clearly favours the whites as a producer. But yeah,
I think the key is that you don't see to see a Montelly that's clearly had so much care taken over it, and to have vines of that sort of age, I thought it had just the most incredible purity and perfume. It was perfect.
Yes. A wine which really outperforms its appellation, I would say, or its expectations.
Yeah. And yeah, so sort of, was your overall one Mazzy on the end then, or did you?
Yeah, so I think my sort of highest score, just flicking through, was the Mazzy.
It was.
I think it's a stunning wine. It's a stunning location. They've got a small plot of Mazzy, but it's 0.22 hectares, so I mean it's not tiny. It's right beside another grower whose wine I know as well, and I rate very highly too. So looking at those differences in style is fascinating. I think it probably has a very sort of warm place in Loïc's heart. He always speaks of it in very fond terms. And it's, aside from the Chambertin that we are occasionally lucky enough to try there, it's the final wine that you get to taste in terms of Grand Cru crescendo. And I think for me, that's the apotheosis in a way of the Domaine.
Cool. Nev?
So, I mean, outside of the Gevrey wines, I'm always drawn to his Meursault, again, Très Vieille Vigne, 90-year-old Chardonnay here, which is, again, pretty crazy. 0.21 hectares, not much of it. But I think what I loved about this is that it's, Loïc has clearly identified that, these vines in this particular plot, right in the centre of the village of Meursault, produces a sort of naturally incredibly intense and powerful example of the appellation. He sort of lent into that, and I like people that sort of when they identify a sort of specific character of a place, they just sort of try and express that to the nth degree, really. And I think this is an example of that. It's unapologetic, it's powerful, muscular expression of Meursault. And I think it's one of those where it's sort of salinity and freshness is sort of all pitched towards the sort of back end of the wine rather than the sort of overwhelming sense of freshness at the front. And I think for a lot of Burgundy lovers, that might not be sort of something they're ultra familiar with, but if, like me, you're a Burgundy lover and you're chasing kind of unique experiences, I think this is a wine that kind of delivers that. There's a sort of deeply sort of sensual textural component to this, which I'm a big fan of. So that's that.
There was a producer once I was tasting in Burgundy, and he told me that all Meursault nowadays doesn't taste like Meursault should, because it's all picked too early, apart from his wine, Dugat-Pys.
Yeah, I mean,
it really does give you that rich old vine fruit, hazelnutty.
Yeah, totally.
And he is a relatively early picker.
Yeah,
but I've
still got that concentrate
style of the wine.
Yeah, it's definitely one to look out for. And the other one, which, to be honest, I almost can't look past in the lineup, is the Gevrey-Chambertin Cœur de Wine from the sort of heart of the Domaine. In many ways, it kind of is the heart of the Domaine, really. I mean, there is a little bit more volume here versus the rest. I mean, as I say, everything else is sort of bits and pieces here and there with small parcels. But the Cœur de Wine, again, Trevier Vine, vine age is up to 115 years old. Yeah, I don't think I've tasted a Gevrey village with the sort of length and intensity that's on show here, to be honest. It's rare that I think that you get a village wine that can do what this does. This would be a nightmare to show blind. I think most people would be in Premier Cru sort of territory. There's just such intensity, and this is where I think the change that Loïc's made and some of that little bump in whole bunch and kind of dialing down the new oak has just given this both flamboyance and muscularity, and I just loved it.
It's always a good way of judging the quality of a Domaine to look at its relatively simple village bottling, because this, in a sense, as you say, is the flagship of the Domaine.
Yeah.
And it's a huge overperformer.
I think actually an important point here to sort of, which is just a single example that shows you how quality focused Loïc is. Loïc actually also makes a Bourgogne Alinar, Bourgogne Rouge. And he actually, that is a Gevrey-Chambertin that is taken from vines that are, within the appellation of Gevrey, but he just doesn't feel that it really hits the heights of what he considers to be a typical Gevrey-Chambertin. And declassifies it to Bourgogne Rouge.
Yeah, but boy, does it have an effect on that. Yeah.
I mean, it's a great wine, but I mean, that's the standards for Loïc are different to everybody else, and I think that's a key point.
Yeah, completely. I think that Halinard is they scored by all of us. I think sort of 18 or higher for the stage. It was pretty exceptional. I mean, I'm happy to jump in now and sort of go with mine. I think the glorious overachiever for me this year, the one that when we were within that 3 hour, I was going to say slog, but it's not. It's a wonderful taste to be a part of. But when we were sort of in it, and the one that jumps out the first time where I took a step back, metaphorically, and thought, was Eversell. So Gevrey, Eversell, and there's the vintage. Obviously, we've spoken about the vintage in a lot of detail on various pods, and there's this ripeness and sweetness of fruit, but it was the balance. You had this sucrosity and density here, where this exceptional fresh acid profile came. It basically just kicked the doors down and helped balance all of that sucrosity and that sweetness of fruit in this most awesome of ways. And that intensity was just lingering on the finish. So I actually scored that 18.5 to 19. So I think I need to start with that. Outside of Gevrey,
quoted you in the offer as saying it was awesome as well. So
there we go.
At least you're consistent.
I am, Americanified vernacular. So yeah. Outside, I would go for, I think, Beaune Clos des Arvaux. I'm torn between that and Pommard Vermurian Haute, because those two were the sort of, I think, the pièce de résistance outside of Gevrey on the red front. Arvaux was lifted and succulent, and it had this wonderful sort of prickle from the sort of slightly early picked style that resonates through, a really joyful freshness. But again, it was that sweet fruit profile, which really, again, blind, you're gonna struggle at times to be 100%. Oh, this doesn't feel like bone because it's not that crunchy style and that sort of rusticity that comes through. But the pommard, again, on there, on my tasting note on the nose there, I just said it's blackberry pie, and I just love that fruit profile that Loïc has captured so brilliantly within the wines, but still, again, poise and balance from freshness. Like that is the key to all of these wines with that vine age for me. So, and I'd agree with you on Mazzi. That's an absolute champion's wine. Yeah, Aaron,
I'm still with you in pommard there. The Levrier Trevé Vin. I have a bit of a soft spot for it. It's the first bone sort of wine that he started making in 2003. So he's been, 21 years he's been there now, and this is the
oldest bone baby.
Exactly. It makes old bones as well.
Hey.
But yeah, vine's now 70 years old. No surprise there how sort of old they are. But my tasting note for it, and I sort of I get laughed at this some points when I say to Guy when we're tasting, if the freshness comes through and you get red fruit, and then also sometimes you get blood orange or blood orange peel. And then when we were tasting with Loïc, Guy was very helpfully translating for us all. And I was trying to mouth to him, blood orange. And you just turned around and said, I have no idea what you're saying, Aaron. Can you speak? I don't think that Loïc knows what blood orange is just yet.
Next time I'll know. It's always blood orange.
It's always blood orange. But that the thing about it is that there's 60% whole bunch fermentation, but you do not feel it. It lends a sort of a more perfumed sort of style to the wine, but it doesn't. Some wines you taste, and this whole bunch fermentation just takes over with spice and sort of dark power. But it's just not the case here. It's sort of a lovely red fruited pommard with that sort of old vine fruit power. And yeah, I just love the tasting note. Adam declared this to be very Heathcliff, which again, I just imagined that Loïc thought, who are these people? But Wuthering Heights for those in the know there. And then
a bit of Kate Bush for us.
No, on the climbing up that other hill. That wasn't where. The whites are actually a bit of a revelation to me now. They're not a style I usually tend to follow. I do really like sort of the concentration that you get here in the whites, and I'm going to go for the Bourgogne Blanc just because it's really interesting. A parcel, 2 parcels, one in Pouligny-Montrachet, one in Gevrey-Chambertin, just makes a sort of really chalky Bourgogne Blanc that sort of has this sort of nice peach and stone fruit with a little bit of green apple, and then on the finish you get this salinity coming through. I agree with Guy that you should always follow a Domaine's village bottling and also the Bourgognes, just to see, not all of us are sort of blessed with enough firepower to drink the Grand Crus like Mr. Muller every week, but sometimes you've just got to be able to, open in a Bourgogne Blanc, a Bourgogne Rouge, you can really see what a producer's trying to do, and it just shows it shows what Loïc is doing when he takes that much care and attention. Further up the ladder, just agree with Guido that the Lavo Saint-Jacques was, in the tasting, everyone was blown away.
All the private customers on our dinner loved the Lavo.
Yeah.
So I think it is true though. It's right to single out the whites as well, because it's now a significant proportion of the demand is white wine. It's nearly a third of production is now white wine. One that I just wanted to give a shout out to because I think it's spectacular is the Pernon-Vergelès Premier Cru Souffletis. So this is just opposite Courton-Charlemagne. It's opposite the hill of Courton. And this was one of the first vineyards that Loïc took Adam and I to when we first visited. And it was being worked by horse just by coincidence at the time that we visited, which maybe it wasn't a coincidence, but it looked incredibly Burgundian and impressive. And what was really impressive is that they don't just take one horse to work a plot of vines. They they take 3 or sometimes even 4, and they need to give them rotation. They need to rest one horse when it gets tired, let it recover. They substitute in another horse. It's like a sort of, rolling subs type thing. But it's a very labor intensive way of working. The vineyard itself is extremely steep, so even if they wanted to get tractors in there, I think they would really struggle. But obviously they want to avoid that compaction and to work in this very laborious way. It's entirely quality driven, and I think is to be applauded. The other thing that I just remembered and sort of leads quite neatly on from that is the fact that in 23, because they were getting to peak ripeness in different plots at slightly different times, and so rather than having a very sort of easy homogeneous harvest, they needed to focus on certain bits, and then sort of it was a real kind of detailed plan of attack. And so Loïc actually recruited 60 pickers this year, whereas he would normally have 30 to 40. So he had 60 out in the vineyards and then 10 working in the Gevrey, which is a huge investment in itself. And, to have that flexibility, not let alone the desire to go out and recruit another 50% of pickers, is pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's the domain of no shortcuts, really. If it's the best way, then it's sort of Loïc's way. And that's, it's just extraordinary. I say, Loïc was actually saying, he was like, just in terms of, obviously, the horse is doing a lot of work there, but he said, even for the guys, working the horse, it's incredibly tiring experience sort of to be doing it. I'd say it's a wonderful thing.
Cool. Fancy doing a bit of picking there next year?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah,
that'd be good fun.
Yeah,
Have to be a bit fitter, perhaps.
Yeah. So, look, the offer is very much live as we record this, and hopefully when it goes out onto the various platforms. So please do get in touch. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of these parcels are small, which equates to tiny quantities. So we don't get really on any the biggest wine we get is about 80 cases, and a lot of them are under a dozen. So it is a quite tricky allocation process. So let us know. These are gorgeous wines, and get in touch with the team if you want to know any more details.
Question for you, Joe. If you were to own sort of one of the Premier Crus or even the Côte d'Ivoire or a Grand Cru, you have 3 bottles. When are you drinking them?
It's a good question. I think Côte d'Ivoire, I think you probably want to give it at least 6-7 years before you're really jumping in on that. And that's, that's village in inverted commas level. Premier Crus, again, depending on which site, but anywhere between 7 and 10, 11 years. And the Grand Crus, if I had the patience, I do think with Loïc style, I would, and I'd probably leave it 15 years before you really went into those Grand Crus. Yeah. But anyway, well, look, we hope you haven't found it too much of a sermon from the spiritual setting when we taste November to this sort of sales-esque table setting here.
One final thing to say on the offer is that the prices are slightly down on last year's. So it's
it's a very valid point.
It's a very nice touch from them in that sense. So I think don't be shy and don't be scared that these are expensive wines. There's no two ways about it. But I think relative to market and relative to what previous vintages have come out at, these are actually looking pretty good.
Yeah, I think it's not even down on last year's. Most of them are below what 2021s were released at. With a handful at the same price. So yeah, kudos. But yeah, hopefully we haven't haunted you too much with this pod, and we'll be in touch soon. So it's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
From over here, it's goodbye from me.
The other side.